Hello everyone, welcome to our .NET Language and Runtime Community Standup. Today we will talk a lot about FSharp and all the fun stuff that is happening in that space. So my name is Immo Landwerth, I'm a program manager on the .NET platform team, and today with me are...
I'm Kathleen Dollard, I'm also a program manager on the .NET team.
Hi, I'm Don Syme. I'm language designer on FSharp, and I work in AI programming tools and also directly on FSharp at Microsoft.
All right. Everyone having a good, it's morning here, but it's evening for you, Don. And so I hope that all folks of Europe having a good evening.
Absolutely great. Having a great time.
Yeah.
Over here in London. And Immo, where are you based? I didn't ask you about this before.
I'm in Redmond, so like it's the same as Kathleen. Basically, we are probably we could walk to each other's place if we wanted to.
We'd get wet. We would get very wet because I'm on the other side of the lake. So yeah, and like a bit. So yeah.
Fair enough.
Right,
and it's also very hot right now.
The small lake, Lake Sammamish, the small lake, not the big lake, not Lake Washington. I'm still on the east side, but I'm anyway. So anyway.
And I see we have some people joining us, and we've got comments on the right. We've got people joining us on YouTube and Twitch. Lovely to have you along. We haven't got StreamYard, that's the name of the platform we're using, but we do have Nordestino Brasileiro, Mr. Quack 1000, Stream Elements is a bot running. I think we won't say hi to the bot. T Persistent, hello, Victor Borges, Immense and the Spion Runner, and he says, good job, man. .NET 6 is looking good. Adela SQ, hi everyone. Barcode underscores from Norway. Constantine Tews, Angel Munoz is joining us. And thank you very much that you're all here. Got a few more coming in, lots coming in, and you will be able to ask questions, and Immo will be able to select those questions as we go through. So please start piling in the questions already if you wish.
So, there's a couple of spaces I want to make sure we touch on today. And one is like the process of FSharp. And another is there's this crazy thing you did with Grado last week. So I don't know where you want to start, but I'd love us to touch on both those things today.
Yeah, so we've had a fantastic month with FSharp. We've had a sort of focus on FSharp month with the .NET Foundation. I guess you might think of them as a .NET marketing team or communications and education team. And of course, Immo and Kathleen, you work with these people a lot as well, Beth Massey and many others. And they just had a month where they said, hey, it's FSharp month. Let's do lots of content and communication about that. And what has been fantastic, I think, is it's given us a chance to rethink where we're at with the language, how we want to talk about, how we want to communicate about it, and also that's in dialogue with the broader FSharp community. Of course, Microsoft is part of the FSharp community. And we've had conversations with Philip Carter, we've had conversations with the FSharp Software Foundation, had the conversations inside Microsoft with management, and with a lot of other contributors, often in sort of open community sessions, kind of like this one. Very open about all these kind of things. We don't hide anything in the FSharp world, and we do a lot of things together with the community. And so one of the things that came out about this, and it kind of bubbled around a bit, we took some ideas up to management and we at Microsoft, and they said, look, okay, so you talk about on the front page of of everything was always this thing about FSharp being the functional language for .NET. There's two aspects to that which are a bit tricky, right? One is that FSharp is actually a functional language for JavaScript as well. Okay, so where the JavaScript tooling is provided by the community, but is used a lot. When I talk Guido van Rossum, FSharp, he was doing JavaScript programming. He didn't know it. It's just doing FSharp, some of it generating HTML, some of it on the client, some of the server. Doesn't realize, but it's a very effective JavaScript language. Secondly, it's this thing about FSharp being a functional language, and it's FSharp supports functional programming extremely well. We often talk about a functional first methodology with FSharp, but it from certain perspectives that is kind of underselling the language in a way, or it is. Yeah, it's just an interesting kind of thing. Though, do you want to talk about And so we bubble this around, and it's always like management quite realistically kind of say, what's functional for? Why are you doing functional? Who cares about functional? If I don't already care, why do I care? And this sort of thing actually came up a lot when we first started FSharp back in the 2000s. And again, of course, it wasn't just say, hey, we're going to do functional just for the fun of it. It was we had a way of talking about FSharp, and that was to say that FSharp delivers succinct programs, and it delivers robust programs, and it delivers performant programs, and also a bunch of other characteristics, including interoperable and including well-tooled and other things like this. And so in some ways, it's better to go back and talk about the characteristics that you're delivering rather than the technical terms like functional or not, because it just leads to argument. Is it functional enough for me? You know, is it? I want an even more functional language.
And it's not a hardcore functional language. So it has a for loop. It has, you know, it has constructs that are that make it look and feel not hardcore. You don't have to use recursion in order to go through a list.
Yeah, absolutely. When you look at the FSharp design, I think it, and of course we get a lot of this from the Camel programming language, which strongly influenced FSharp. It's there's this wonderful image. I might even try and dig it out. I don't know. I don't share my screen right now. If I presume we're not sharing my screen, but I will actually dig it out as we go. I'll dig it out at the moment when you do have when I have a pause in the chat. And it's basically, you know, shows a productivity curve, or it's actually kind of the inverse productivity curve. You start out highly productive, we'll do it going down, although the thing is actually inverted. You start out highly productive, and then you discover objects, and you go deep into inheritance, right? And you kind of go crazy about modeling inheritance hierarchies for absolutely everything, and kind of refine, and your productivity goes down and down and down, right? And then you realize, hey, you start with data and functions, and then you find objects, and then you go back to data and functions effectively. Maybe you've learned something. You still become a better programmer, perhaps, by learning how to use object programming correctly. But data and functions is that kind of sweet spot. Then people do the same thing with functional programming. They discover functional programming. They start passing loads of functions around, or they start learning category theory or something like that. They go off the deep end in functional, right? And they're certainly learning interesting concepts, but it's not necessarily clear that that's translating into productivity, and certainly not clear it's translating into productivity in team situations, okay, where that needs to translate across a whole team, okay? And so, and then they get back to this sweet spot, which is data and functions, okay? And that is, and depending on your point of view of what is data and how you organize your functions, that's really the sweet spot of where programming lies. And it's what OCaml was always good at, and it's what FSharp is absolutely great at. Now that data will often be immutable, will have be a lot less mutable than the typical sort of Java kind of programming. And the way you to declare and organize your functions will vary a bit, but that's sort of when we say we do functional programming, what we mean is we do data and functions well. Yeah.
So I was struck. I was looking at some FSharp, and I looked at a little problem, and I did it with recursion because I knew some Haskell a while back, and so I did it thinking like Haskell. I use fold and blah 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 blah, and I worked with somebody who knows Haskell really well, and it was a lot of trouble. And then you and I chatted, and you're like, you can just use a for loop for that. And you put it together, just, and it's like it really is nicely readable in a casual human sense, where this fold recursion solution that we came up with, while it worked, it was way more. So one thing I really like about FSharp is that you can come at it from a point of view is for what you're showing right now, what you're doing right now, what makes it the most readable, the clearest, the easiest. In general, that's going to be the most performant. There's not too many potholes on that. And so functions let you build your kind of high level of your program in a very readable way, whether that's using Fable, which is for JavaScript, or whether it's using, just a simple function with arguments, and some of those arguments are functions. But then when you go into it, you can always make sure that it's readable and understandable. And I think that's what struck me most, and kind of coming back to FSharp.
Yeah. And so, for instance, again, when we talk about doing functional programming, that may not be passing functions around as arguments, and it may just be simply doing functional abstraction, just taking chunks of code, lifting them out, giving that a good name, and defining a function, and then passing in the arguments through to that. And FSharp, particularly because of the type inference that's going on all the way through it, it can be extremely succinct and fluent to kind of just carve out your code into lots of different well-named chunks. So this whole thing has given us a bit of a chance to do a rethink and to focus more on the sweet spots of FSharp. I think over time we need to have more of those conversations. And we will also, I'm just looking at some of the comments coming through on the thread. We have, we want to focus on the sweet spots and giving them really good, simple, positive, easy to use, clear tooling. So, for instance, focus a lot more on debugging, and focus a lot more on the quality of data and functions, and making that experience really positive and simple. So I did get the chance to teach Guido van Rossum FSharp, and perhaps I'll pull.
Not everybody might know who Guido is, so why don't we?
Yeah, I will. Why could you do me a screen share there?
Yeah. Do you want me to share the screen right now?
Well, I think you see you've got a question. Did Guido give an indication whether to consider using FSharp again on his own? I will. Yeah, so you can share the screen now. That's fine. I'm probably doing sharing. So if you want to look at first I'll bring up the session for everyone. So if you just go to Guido Learns FSharp, and you can take a look at Gone Teaches Guido FSharp on YouTube, and you can watch this. It's an hour and a half in full content. You can put it on fast play. We don't talk about fast, and you can watch it. Now, if you want to see the material I use, you can go to this repo here, Guido Learns FSharp, in github.com/Syme. And it's a dojo. So dojo is where you're given a half-working application, and you've got tasks to do throughout the code. And so in the source directory there's the client-server application. You've got some tasks on the client side. So there's one, for instance, task 3.3, fill in the temperature.
Can you make that text a little bigger?
I can.
Thank you.
Good. So you can see fill in the weather response, and you've got to. It's always showing 3 initially, but you've got to get some data out of the weather response up here for this particular task. Okay. Now we won't go through this again today. We might go back and look at some of the language constructs, but one of the there is a guide in here you can look at, and it is a PDF document from .NET.conf. And one of the things I did is we took pauses along the way to talk about lessons of the language, and I just run through some of these lessons that it kind of corresponds to what we were just talking about. That when you look at this code, what you're seeing is lots of function definitions and lots of generation of immutable data. Now those immutable data are the views on the client side, but it's really just functions and generated data, functions generating data. And you also see some very the number of language constructs I wanted to get across was actually quite small, because actually a lot of FSharp programming drops out in relatively few. Actually, so there is where is it here? I actually had a list of the language constructs, but it is not in exactly where I thought it was. Let me just go through and see if it was here. Sorry about that. Okay, but I will actually write out the language constructs since there's so few of them, and I'll write it out in a script. One is you sort of have let value equal. I'll make the font a bit bigger here as well.
Thanks.
Like this, nice and big. So one construct is defining some data. Okay, so it doesn't. We'll just sort of ignore the data on the right, but it'll be something. Okay. Another construct is defining a function, some function, and we have an argument here, and it equals data dot length or something like this. Okay. So defining, so let on a value, let on a function. And then you'll see pattern matching. Oh, so we'll see conditionals. If something is something, then something else, something like this. And you can put in elif in here, elif that, then something else like that. And of course, you normally put these across multiple lines like this. Okay. So that's the next construct, and only about 10 of these things. Okay, the next is that you have some expression and you do some property and you get some property out of the expression. The next thing is you actually call a function. You call some function on some data. So let's put input here. Input is a list of integers and it's input dot length or something. Actually, let's just do sort of list dot sum of input. So this one's the input, and here we call some function on the data. Okay, so you also have some expression. So you might have data dot so we have expression and then property, and you can also have an expression and then a method, and then you can put in some arg1 and arg2 like this. And what else is there? There is a pattern match where you have some data coming in, and you might pattern match it with, say, an empty list, and you do that like that, and you might pattern match with a list of 2 elements like this, and then you do v1 plus v2 or something like that. Pattern match. And what else is there? You might have a for loop for this in for v in data do such and such. Okay. And now there's some basics, and really a lot of FSharp code drops out with that sort of thing. And one of the interesting things is that these things start to combine, and so you can have these list expressions, which, for instance, we've used one of them up above. You have 1, 2, 3 like this. But in the middle of these list expressions, you can actually you can have 1 and then 2 and then 3. You can write it like this if you want. But you can actually put like a for loop in this kind of expression. Then for I in data, that's I in data do, and you can put so you can generate I plus 10, for example. Okay, so so this is let more data equal this kind of thing. So this will generate the numbers 1, 2, 3, and then we have the numbers 0 to 99. It will generate 13, 14, 15 up to 109. So the thing is that you can have these. You might think, well, why am I having a for loop in the middle of my data? And it's you're just using this kind of lovely list expression form to just splat out more data, and you can put conditionals in here. So if you can say system dot date time dot system dot date dot now dot day. Okay, in fact, you can match on this. Let's do a match expression. Match day of week with system system.day.week.monday goes to, well, on Monday, we might want to put out a 5 and a 6 in our list. And on Tuesday, we might want to do something different. We can just keep doing, we might just do 5, but you can just do whatever, keep doing whatever you want. You can put as much control logic as you want. And the control constructs are, you put lets in here. So you can put a let j equal I plus 10 in here, and then you can omit j plus 20 or something. So you can put definitions, you can put for loops, you can put matches, and and you can just generate loads and loads of data. Now you might think, is this functional programming or not? Because you were kind of saying, hey, FSharp isn't as functional as you think because it's got these things like for loops. But suddenly we're using these things in a very functional way, which is sort of the generative creation of data. And so what's really lovely is the way that these, what you might think of as imperative programming suddenly get put into this kind of functional kind of context of generating data. Because what could be more functional than kind of whacking out some data? Let's fill in some of the things up here too. There is V, something like that. And it's telling us here that this match is incomplete, and that actually tells us an example. Sunday may not be covered by this thing here, which is quite funny. So we will just put in the on any other day. You might say, well, how do you generate nothing? Well, you just use that for nothing in FSharp. Okay. So, and you can have while loops in here. You can actually have mutable data in the middle of this sort of thing. You can have let mutable first or something equals true. And then so you can put that in your iteration of your loop like this. And then each iteration of your loop where you actually say, well, we're not on the first one anymore, so we'll put in false at the bottom like that. Okay, so this is yielding a value. This is doing that imperative thing. And before that, you might say, if it's the first, then j plus 20, else j plus 30. Okay, and so now, just so people know what's going on, there's an implicit yield here. There's an implicit yield here. There's a yield, meaning yield a value, cough up a value. And here's another yield, here's another yield, and here's another yield. Now, you can make those yields explicit if you want. You can literally go and put the yield in front of all of them. If you do one, the compiler asks you to do all of them, please. So you do a yield like that, and then you go through and you have to do the rest as well. Okay, so you might say, well, what's all that for? That's kind of good. You can mix these constructs quite nicely. For loops suddenly become very functional. Matching is both functional on the input, and then it's sort of yielding outputs. And the cool thing is that if you suddenly want to do an IEnumerable and make the whole thing on demand, right? It makes it a bit like a C# generator. Then you can do that. You just kind of do it like that, and you get the sequence, which is the FSharp name for IEnumerable, and suddenly FSharp, more data is now a sequence of integers, which does everything on demand. If you want to do an array, you can do that. You could just, this is the syntax for arrays in FSharp. You can do that. And that's important because it's very, very efficient to generatively create arrays. Okay, so you kind of get this very fluent translation of this kind of generative creation of data. And sometimes entire big chunks of programs drop out as just create data in this generative kind of way. I was looking at some examples, but okay. So this sort of construct, the fact that there's relatively few constructs here. I did, just to list them out, I did do a sort of let mutable thing equals 1, and then you can go and mutate that thing later on.
It has a special way. So when you look at something and that's making an assignment, if it is a mutable assignment to something that is mutable, then you can see it just right off with the,
it does. It actually gives you
really clear syntax,
a different color for here, which is great. I think I actually. Yeah. I'm really happy with that bit of tooling. In fact, I think the colorization of FSharp is just getting better all the time. Okay, so that's the kind of theme that, as I came to teaching Guido F#, that's kind of part of what I implicitly wanted to get across. Relatively few constructs, but they play together extremely nicely. Yeah. It's because a similar sort of story that we had actually, as you want to turn things into async programming. I won't do it quite here because you have to put in a return and take out the yields. But again, to make something async is very simple. If you want it to be an asynchronous sequence, an IEnumerable, you just do this sort of thing. And it's not the library. You have to reference a library to get this support. It's called FSharp.control.async. And this basic process of sort of dropping into a mode of programming where you're generating lists or arrays or IEnumerables and making data is part of what I want to get across. So if we go across to some of the code that we used with Guido Learns F#, and you might say, well, I don't do that kind of programming, but let's take a look at what this is. And this is actually the user interface. It's a web user interface. And I want to look at some of the language constructs that Guido was programming with. And we can say, take a look at look at this here. Okay. Now the thing is that this is a HTML. This is generating HTML. Okay, you can see various divs being created. Maybe this is a bit of this is a table. This one here.
Yeah, it's easy.
So you can see there's a table, and everybody's familiar with this. It's got some children. It's got TBD, TR. Okay, this is just the kind of code I was writing before. It's a TR has two React elements. The first of them has got a header element, and then it's got a 2D element. And so these are just list expressions, exactly like we were doing before. There's no kind of, these are just functions here generating React elements from other React elements. And if you look down here, then as we generate this part of the user interface, we actually do use the constructs I was just doing. We do use a match, and we say if there's a validation error, then we generate an icon. And down here, if there's a validation error, then if there's no validation error, we don't generate anything in the help section. But if there is, then we generate a primary color and some text. So you can see us just using these exact same constructs to generate a whole web user interface. And because F# is so good at this, then you actually don't need Razor. You don't need templating anymore. The programming language itself acts as a sufficiently good, for many purposes, acts as a sufficiently good templating and HTML description kind of language. And I think actually F# has some of the best HTML DSLs around in the industry for a strongly typed language. You get a lot of checking as you're working through in this kind of setting. Yeah. Okay. So that's why that's why I wanted to land Guido in this kind of sweet spot. I'll just list out for people watching, and maybe there's some people who haven't used F# much. I will just write out a couple of the other constructs you can see in that file. One is pipelining, where you might take some data and you put it into a function like this. So for instance, you might take data and you might do list.map, and then you have an anonymous function which goes to x plus 1. You'll also see tuples, where you might take data. So we have two lots of data 2 going from 10, and you take a tuple of data 2 just to give you the inputs or something. Then you can look at the type here, and that's a tuple. You'll see the star here to say int list. So we have pipelining, and tuples here. Of course, you can have simpler tuples. You might just have 1, 3, and 5 as tuple. Okay. So I think in a lot of the guides to F#, we have we show these primitives quite well. We say, hey, you can do this, you can do this, you can do this. But probably what we've been failing to do in a way is get across for how those things actually play out in practice in a whole architecture. Why is that all you need to do programming? All right, why do you just need these 10, 15 kind of constructs, and then you can just program with libraries from that point? And so I'd really encourage people to take a look at Guido Learns FSharp as a starting point. It is based on a thing called the Safe Stack Dojo for a larger dojo. This is a slightly more challenging one, and it takes you through more of the client-server architecture and the details about how you're communicating in the client-server world. And it also has deployed to Azure and a whole lot of other things. And all of these things is using a wonderful tech stack called SafeStack, which you can find out all about here. And it's an FSharp thing combining a ASP.NET Core, Azure, FSharp, and the architecture you're using to write your user interface is called Elmish. And lots of information about that here. And it's all FSharp based and really very sweet to use.
Awesome. Let's pick up some of the questions from the chat. Immo, have you got something
great.
for us?
Let me pop back onto here.
Yeah, there were a few ones. I think one thing that in the beginning that was interesting, I felt, and now I need to scroll up and find it again. There's this one here, which I've heard quite a bit. So for my team, combining FSharp project with C# project is in the same solution is much more likely than FSharp only applications. We use C#. So I enjoy seeing improvements in cross-language tooling. What are your thoughts on that?
Right. Absolutely. So there's this core story around FSharp, which is like there's, you got these relatively simple constructs. You can do a lot with that. And then there's lots and lots of practical issues about using and deploying FSharp in different industry, enterprise context, in different team kind of contexts, and lots of choices to make about how to do that. We traditionally, I guess the Visual Studio tooling hasn't been good enough with regard to FSharp and C# working together. Go-to definition across languages is one area. Metadata definition for seeing things from C# libraries. It's a lot of different bits of tooling, and then gradually we've been lighting more and more of those up, and haven't been making a big song and dance about it, but I just think over the last 3-5 years, we've just made a lot of incremental improvements in that story. I should say JetBrains Rider is also very good in these regards for cross-language working. And there were both, one fantastic thing in the FSharp world is both JetBrains Rider and Visual Studio Code and Visual Studio all built on the same code base. They all share this thing called the FSharp compiler service. It's kind of like the Roslyn for FSharp. And so we all work together in contributing to that core set of tooling. The JetBrains team also contribute directly to those components. And so we're all kind of benefiting from each other's work. Yeah.
Great. All right, do we have another one?
Yeah, there's one that is a bit more specific. Are there any plans for leveraging pattern matching to impose compile time error checks, i.e. type non-negative number equals non-negative number of int larger than 0 to disallow all negative values upon construction?
Yeah, so the answer is there is no plan in the FSharp world to put in refinement types, I guess is what you'd call this, where you can kind of use code like that. If you take int greater than 0 to be a bit of code, or maybe a very pure bit of code in some expressions of this, to kind of constrain down types, and you hope that the logic of the type checker can work things out. Now the problem is there's no really stable position, because working out whether a number is greater than 0 or not is very, very hard. And the problem is you can never do it all statically. So you end up with pushing some of it off to dynamic checks. But then the problem with that is that carrying around the extra information to kind of do a lot of that kind of thing, might bloat out your objects as one particular problem. You might need to augment them with kind of extra bits of information. And it can also just impose really weird runtime costs. But above all, it just makes it really hard for programmers to find a stable point about how much do they make static, how much information goes into the static world. This comes up a lot in the Guido conversation, as you could expect, between a typed and untyped language. We talk about record types, for example, and it was interesting because he said, Guido says, so that's a dictionary. And I say, yeah, but it's a dictionary where we know everything statically. And he says, Python, that's all this one thing. And you go, yeah, okay, we've got a dictionary and then we got records. And yeah, you're right. But for my F# world, it's like I'm so used to kind of making this carving split between what we know statically and what we leave off to be dynamic. It's wired into my brain to be automatically making that divide. Python people actually don't have to think about that divide until much, much later when they think, why didn't the compiler know that statically, right? They also have to think about the divide whenever they are using the Python type system, which is becoming more and more common. These optional type annotations. TypeScript people have the same kind of thing. But F# and C# divide the world into what you know statically and what you know dynamically. And if you try to push too much information in the static world, it's just really bad for the programmer experience. In fact, if you look at things like the HTML DSL that I was showing before, it's not like we try and create different kinds of React elements. We don't create a different React element for a button and a different kind of React element for a table and so on. We just have React element and there's one type. It's got just the right amount of typing. Not too much, not too little. And that's often a thing that library designers in F# and C#, of course, in any statically typed language, but particularly in F#, I think, have to kind of navigate. Let's give this thing just the right amount of typing and not try and overdo it. And yeah, so I was talking before about data and functions being a sweet spot. It's actually something else. It's data and functions and just the right amount of static typing. Okay, and that's the sweet spot always you want to land in. And you go too much in the data, you're in object-oriented fairyland. Too much into the functions and you're in category theory fairyland. Too much into the static typing and you're in logic and proof fairyland. You're just got to get just the right amount of those three, and then you're in Goldilocks kind of happy territory.
Yeah.
So one question that I had based on what you just described is, like, did you notice any difference in the way Guido was writing the code that you would try to run it more frequently? Because I assume if you come from a dynamic typed world, you're very used to running code a lot more.
It's actually really nicely. We set him up in, I don't know if am I still screen sharing?
No.
You're not, but we can edge back.
Yeah, I will. I presume you cannot hear. Let me just whack that on. I will just whack this on so that people can see a screen here. But we were using a live coding kind of setup where basically every time you save the file, the watch system of .NET kicks in, and everything automatically hot reloads in the browser and on the server side as well. So they kind of you just co-develop. And so Guido never explicitly ran any F# code until right near the end when he does some F# scripting. That'll be at the end here. He's using some F# type providers to crack an API, and he's doing some kind of scripting kind of stuff, and then running that just directly in the REPL. But so we were never in the kind of F5 restart reload kind of setting that we have traditionally associated with C#. But this hot reload experience is really fantastic. It's one of the great things about SafeStack is that it loads you up with this both client side and server side hot reload.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So I wonder if we should switch gears. If we have more questions, we should pull them up. But I wonder if we should switch gears and talk a little bit about F# and the way it gets developed, the process. When Mads came to visit us, we had a chat about that. And I wonder if we ought to include some of that
Sure,
like what is
sure.
where does it fit? I know it's in the foundation, right? And it's been open source since the beginning, or was it initially closed source and then went open source? And where's its home? And all that kind of stuff.
Sure, I will. Yep, I'll absolutely talk about that, because I would love it if people who are listening in might want to get involved in contributing to FSharp at any level. And of course, as users, you also will be wanting to contribute back issue reports and the like as well. So the community home of FSharp is fsharp.org. So this is kind of the landing page for FSharp, and the place you can point your friends, and you can, if you're sitting with someone having a drink and you want to kind of show on your phone what is FSharp, you can just pop people to this. The Microsoft or the .NET Foundation have a landing page for FSharp, and in fact some of the fsharp.org material comes across to that, and you'll see the landing page. You might come across this, which is sort of more of a marketing kind of page controlled by the .NET Foundation. And the chief docs page for FSharp is docs.microsoft.com, and a lot of those other things will link through to this kind of documentation.
And let me throw in that the docs are also open source.
Docs, exactly. You can click on this lovely big edit button here. I'll just make this a bit bigger. You can edit. And if you want to learn FSharp, if you're new to it, then this beginning FSharp video series is absolutely fantastic. Just come out from Luis Quintanilla, and it's just 10-minute videos, so really short, sweet videos on getting started with FSharp. Now that's the end result. That's the product. Everything's available here to go and learn FSharp language reference tools, documentation, style guides, everything else you need to get going with FSharp is either available here for the core stuff, and of course using Google for to find a lot of other material across the web. Now, what's under the hood? Okay, well, so FSharp gets delivered into the it primarily gets delivered into the .NET Core SDK. Okay, if you have .NET on your machine, then you have FSharp, and I can come here and I can go .NET FSI, which starts the FSharp interactive REPL, and I can go 1+1, and I can get 2, and I can quit that thing, and I've used FSharp. And you can also create FSharp projects and so on. From anywhere you have access to the .NET tool. And that you have a command line compiler and everything else you need to do. Now, now we also deliver tooling into the editors. And so if you have Visual Studio here, I've been using Visual Studio. You can also you can have solutions and projects in FSharp and templates and everything else. I was using an FSharp script inside Visual Studio when I was editing here. And we also deliver into Visual Studio Code. So you can just bring up some random bit of FSharp code. And and the thing that you use in VS Code, it'll prompt you for it automatically as soon as you open any FSharp. It's called Ionide FSharp.
Can you make the font a little bit bigger on those?
Sure.
So people can see Ionide there. Make sure that they don't have to try to remember it.
It will prompt you automatically as soon as you open the FSharp language extensions. You will get Ionide FSharp prompted. Okay. Right. Now, where does all that come from? The primary repository is in GitHub, so .NET/FSharp. Okay. This is the FSharp compiler, the core library, the language service, and the integration for Visual Studio. There's a separate repository for the integration to Visual Studio Code that picks up these bits. Okay. And, so this gets delivered into the .NET SDK. Effectively, the bits out of this are what form the sort of .NET, the FSharp part of the .NET SDK. Okay, now we for the language design process, we use a very similar structure to C#, and in fact, I think the C# people effectively took it from us, which is good. And everything is done out of the FSharp Software Foundation, who run FSharp org, the community organization for FSharp. We do everything in FSlang Design, and we have RFC process, and you can see the active. Why don't we start with the, for instance, what RFCs made it into FSharp 5.0, and you can see the list of RFCs, and each of them, for example, we did string interpolation in FSharp 5.0, and you can see the samples of code and what we're trying to do and the motivation, the design principles and the detailed design, and so on all the way down. And this will have links through to the implementation, which is here. And that will be over in that repo I was just looking at, .NET FSharp.
So is most of the decision-making done then with the RFC process online, or?
Everything is done online and fully openly. If you follow the FSlang Design, now this is not the start of everything, because we actually start with a separate project process, which is a suggestions. It's a parallel repository, FSlang suggestions. And anyone can come along here and you can just make any kind of suggestion you like. So, for example, we can just choose some random thing. This is actually something we've turned into an RFC. And it's a suggestion. It's one I started, so I'll pull it up. And it says, okay, we're going to add some things to the FSharp core library. And here's what we propose, etc. And here are various notes on that and pros and cons. It asks you, if you come along and make a suggestion, it asks you to think a little bit about the pros and cons and this sort of estimated cost. And it asks you to tick some boxes. And it says, please search on Stack Overflow before you do this. Please search the site. It's not a duplicate. And we also don't, if things have already obviously been decided, then probably best not to ask. Should be something that is kind of a new thing. It's not already fundamentally part of FSharp Design, but feel free to open new suggestions if you want. And then two very important things: we don't break FSharp. FSharp maintains backward compatibility, and also, well, perhaps you'd like to help implement and test this. Just consider being involved, not just contributing the suggestion, but why not go through and implement it as well? And we'll absolutely help you do this. And you can also vote on these suggestions by saying whether you think this is important, and you can probably add other the emojis in there. You can also comment all the way down. And then eventually the suggestions will get this approved in principle label. There are plenty of suggestions that already have approved in principle labels. You're welcome to take a look at those. And then that's an invitation for anyone to start writing an RFC. And here's, for instance, where I wrote the RFC for this just earlier today, actually. And the implementation had already been done. So the RFC acts as like the anchor for the feature. It's a place that links through to, well, where did this come from? It's like the permanent record of the documentation for the feature. Or the kind of core technical reference, and everything should link off the RFC. It's the kind of start, the center of the world. It should link through to the implementation or multiple attempts at implementation. There should usually be a link to a place where people can discuss this, and then there should be a complete technical kind of guide as well.
Yeah, looks great. Looks like it'd be easy to follow. We might want to switch gears just a little bit, because there's a number of things have come up in the chat about performance. And that includes somebody had a comment about currying and FSharp taking advantage of that. There's a couple of things comparing it to FSharp. I've already asked a different question, Immo, so we'll do performance first, and then we'll get to FSharp next steps. which I think would be great. But performance-wise, where does F# sit in the spectrum of languages, and what do you want to say about F# performance?
Okay, so F# performance is always in the limit. It's the same. It's pretty much the same as C#, right? Because you can always write whatever C# code in F#. There's a path for F# code. Sometimes in order to get the appropriate performance, you might need to flatten out F# code a little bit. By that, I mean use less, so you might be using less functional programming in a way, or you might, when I say flatten, so for instance, if you have some data, am I sharing there, Immo?
Yes.
Okay. And I do a list.map of x goes to x plus 1. And then I do another map over this, and I pair x with its pair like this. Then there might be a process where you actually say, hey, I want to flatten this out to a single map. And you go, let v equal this. And then, so you might kind of find yourself doing that kind of flattening of code a little bit. So data's not defined here. And it might be that sometimes you change the uses of immutable data structures through to mutable data structures. Sometimes you change the use of F# lists through to flatter arrays. You might also want to use immutable collections more. You might also change maps through to dictionaries at certain key points in your program. But nearly the vast majority of the logic of your service or whatever you're implementing can be nearly always in in sort of standard straight up simple F# kind of code.
All right. Cool.
And one thing that is kind of asked in chat is kind of because both C# and F# compile down to IL, right? And so in IL there's no such thing as, you know, functions themselves, right? They're always part of effectively a class, right? So
Yep.
What are your thoughts on that? Like, some people claim in chat that, you know, if IL would have first-class representation for that, there would be more potential for optimizations.
That's not really the case at all. So .NET gives us everything we need to get good performance, and there's a lot of myths about. As I said, functional programming is just one thing you can do in F# in any case, and a lot of programming just doesn't drop out by having to do anything particularly magical. So there's also a lot of myth that these kind of languages somehow need their own garbage collector or something special. That's not true. The .NET garbage collector is absolutely fantastic for what for this kind of coding that we're doing here. So we also, I mean, there's a bunch of things you have to know to get good performance out of .NET systems, but pretty much, so for instance, things about large objects, for example, the large object heap and lifetimes of those very large objects, very large arrays and values. And so some of those apply to F# as well. But those are pretty well known in standard guides on .NET performance. Yep. I think that answers the question. Should we pull up the next question?
Yeah, I think performance-wise, this was it. Kathleen, did you have anything else that you wanted to cover?
Kathleen, you're on mute.
There was a garbage truck. That's why I was on mute, and I forgot. Yeah. Anyway, so Immo had brought up a question, and then he took it down about, you know, kind of what's next. So where's F# sitting right now in its cycle? I don't think it really matches this C# cycle completely, and so I think we're looking at 5.1 coming up. Is that going to make it into .NET 6?
No, actually, we will use the language version F# 6.
Oh, we are going to use it. Okay, super.
For the next version of F#. You can see everything's open. So let me just go over to our FSharp Lang Design repo. You can go to the preview features, and most of these will be coming into FSharp 6. So we will gradually take them out of preview and put them into on by default through the course of .NET 6. .NET 6 will, of course, have like some updates as it goes through, and we will be adding these features. So what have we got in here? We have some really important performance work to make that process of generating lists and arrays using those for loops and the constructs I was showing you before. That's now like 4 times more performant in its core existence. Cool. And that is really, really happy. It's just wonderfully fast, faster than you would ever write by hand, because we do these. You create these collectors which kind of work really nicely for like 1 and 2 element lists, or really, really interesting kind of results. We also have some cleanup, wonderful cleanup by the community, where FSharp, as people have seen, is a white space sensitive language. So, for example, that's really nice. If you want to put all of this into some basics or something, here you can just come along here and you can just tab everything in like that, and then you've got and you can start using. So there's a lot of tabbing in FSharp code, because then you can use some basics.data, for example. Okay, but FSharp code does give out some warnings and errors when you get that indentation kind of wrong. So you can see that if you misindent internal blocks like this, then it is going to complain. And it gives out, so we've done a really nice cleanup of the warnings and the corner cases associated with that. And so that just makes everything much more uniform, and it makes the FSharp auto formatter. So there is an auto formatter for FSharp code. It's called Fantomas, and it's part of the Visual Studio Code tooling, and that makes that work a lot better. The most important thing in terms of performance and end-to-end usability in the context of .NET is that now you can define .NET tasks natively using task curly, and you can take a look at this builds on a very general mechanism called resumable code, which you can use to build asynchronous sequences and all sorts of other things. And that's funny, because from the user's perspective, this is the only new construct you get. But as you can see in FSharp, I showed you like async and lists and seek and so on. Just adding one of these into FSharp plays very nicely with everything else, and it really augments, it cooperates with all the other features of the language. And so it is actually a big deal to add this into FSharp and to add this general mechanism as well.
Cool.
Yeah, so I invite people to take a look through the rest of those as well.
So will FSharp 6 ship with .NET 6 in November?
Yeah, that's
cool.
That is absolutely the plan. As I said, nearly all of those are already in main and we're in preview, but we'll be taking some of them out of preview for .NET 6. Okay. And the rest will gradually come out of preview.
Okay, cool.
Then moving forward, is your plan to lock the language version to the platform version, or is that just .NET 6 it happens to align? It's
just coincidence. I mean, I think like the way we all seem to work is we kind of go back and forth on this kind of thing, right? One day we're creating like new versions of .NET, like .NET Core, and then there's this process where things come back together and everything lines up for a while, and then we kind of go off in different directions. There's no particular reason why we would lock to .NET. And from my perspective, I don't really care much about version numbers. We just have a great pipeline of delivery that we've got the RFC process, we've got the implementation process, we've got the preview process, and then we're just putting things through the pipeline.
Yeah, like I joke about it that my job on the .NET team is to come up with new version numbers for stuff, and that's entirely untrue.
Yeah.
Let's talk about portable profiles.
Yes, that's a Turing complete problem to talk about. No, it's an interesting thing. So I feel like there's some expectations, I guess, on the C# side that moving forward, a lot of the stuff that we do has to do with, cross-stack features, like where we change the runtime to do some interesting stuff in the language and then some corresponding libraries features.
Absolutely.
Is that something that you also think about from the F# side? Like, what could we do in the runtime to make some F# features better?
So no, I think because partly there's a steady stream of things coming through from these C# processes, which are all entirely usable for F# as well. So let's take string interpolation. Okay, so as I said, we have wonderful string interpolation in F#. C# and the runtime, the libraries have done a round of work on increasing the performance profile of that. F# can pick that up just by changing our code gen anytime we want. And so that's fine by me. We're always picking up performance improvements in garbage collection and JIT. So we actually, when you actually count the number of people contributing to the positively to the end result of F#, we actually have a lot of people at Microsoft and contributors in other settings as well. All of whom are pouring in wonderful time to the .NET runtime and the .NET libraries, and all of that is usable as well. So now I think it's really interesting that we're getting into a win-win cycle between the languages and the runtime. It had always been, when I got into the languages game, that win-win that OCaml was getting between runtime and language, and it had this sort of integrated point of view on compilation from end to end and how a language feature would play out end to end. It was such a sweet spot to be in. And I think .NET is so well positioned, compared to the JVM, for example, where it's really hellishly hard for them to progress the JVM in any reasonable way. But I think we've got you got to have, when you do this, you got to have a good design ethos. You got to have a lot of design experience, because you could throw trash into your runtime and destroy things. And I think we've seen some examples of that in the past. So some of it got flushed away with .NET Core. Yeah. We could talk about particular features, but some things like app domains did make things very difficult for the runtime people, and or remoting .NET was another feature that was not the right thing to suddenly try and integrate at the runtime layer. And it's been so great that we've been able to do a flushing process on that around things. Now we've got to be careful going forward. It's what goes into the runtime goes in forever, and we've got to get it right. Yeah. And but yeah, I think it's really exciting times for .NET. I think it's the best, by far and away, the best runtime in industry today. I know the runtime doesn't get used in some places where it should be, like in AI and machine learning. I think it could be used so much more, and I think maybe over time it will. But technically speaking, the foundation is amazing.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a .NET guy pretty much since the early betas came out, and I'm still excited. As you said, there's more stuff coming, and there's always more stuff to learn, and it seems like it's a never-ending stream of improvements.
Kathleen, when was your first involvement with .NET?
With .NET, it was it was with the early betas. I was a BBC person coming over, so I was there from the very beginning. Yeah,
so we actually all started around the same time in like 98, 99.
Yeah, so the design is super interesting, because one of the things is that we have these design teams that do kind of a little bit different focus. And Immo runs the BCL, the base class library API, and it kind of takes over kind of some other API. It's kind of our API experts, and they meet in open, like I don't know, 4 hours a week or something. You meet a lot. And so it's really, that was one of the reasons I was really interested in the fact that FSharp does it all online, where the API review it's a public meeting, and then the C# LDM, for what I think are still good reasons, is it's a closed meeting with notes immediately available. So everybody can know what's talked about, but it's not yet an open meeting, and might not be. So these different meetings, all these people kind of work together. And of course, with COVID, it's all been interesting as we've changed that rhythm, and still have all these different things moving together. And it happens because when the LDM is talking about something that needs the runtime, then there's runtime people in the meeting, because a lot of that is really base work when the languages need to ask for something in the runtime, which in C# this time around, it's kind of static interface stuff. That's pretty deep in the runtime. But yeah, it's cool to work on it, seeing all these things working together, getting to play with it. So yeah.
Should we answer? I could call it a couple more of the questions that are coming
Yeah,
through,
and then
but also
to,
just thank you to, I know there's a lot of discussion has been going on in that chat.
yeah,
We've been seeing, we've got,
great.
just to call out some of the names, we've got Sean, we've got Fule Snabel, who I'm not sure who that is. Good to have you along. I've seen you've been lots of interesting conversations there. Man in a High Castle, glad to have you here. One learner, Sean, right now, just to look at some of the things that I'm seeing coming through. It says, I never came across the reasoning for the deprecation of code access security, which from what I call, it started in .NET Framework 4.0. So I'll tell you my version of that answer, which is that it didn't provide a strong security boundary. It was far too leaky as a security boundary for anybody's real world use today. If you are going to have a security boundary, it must be small, must be code reviewable, must be very, very tight. You look at when the microprocessors themselves, ring 0, ring 1, etc., are leaking information across those security divides, there's no way that we could continue to justify trying to make code access security a true, honest security boundary in the modern world. You have to use the process as the security boundary at best, or the database or other such things. Anyway, there may be more politic answers to that, but I will give my version of that. Tell me if we have to go with regard to time, but I can do a few more of these questions.
So we're over, but we've got people still asking questions. You might got a little bit more time. We can hang out a little bit longer.
Flick through. So is type classes a thing in both the CLR and language support? Well, actually, that's a very interesting question. It relates a lot to this sort of static interfaces kind of work and other things. It's very hard to get a single stable mechanism that would satisfy all possible languages, well, F#, even F# and C# and all possible future iterations on it. But there is elements of that ticking through. F# has great generic math support. We've got generic math types and functionality coming through in .NET. And so a lot of the uses of type classes, and F# has some support as well for static type parameters and the like. But I think it's enough for practical programming purposes. Let's just look at these, just scrolling through. So there's a question, will more advanced functional programming features be coming to F#, or will that undermine the pragmatic philosophy that F# would have? That's exactly the kind of thing I want to get across, that F# functional programming is just one thing you can do with F#. We absolutely have that practical philosophy. You don't even have to think of F# as a functional programming language. It's a succinct language, it's a robust language, it's a performant language. So that means I wouldn't encourage you towards thinking of it as being the uber functional language, which talked about those productivity curves, those kind of, you can go down a rabbit hole with functional programming. You absolutely can, all the way down, and you don't end up in a particularly productive spot. F#'s not going there. It's absolutely got to be pragmatic end to end. And the functional programming it has absolutely supports that sweet spot that I was talking about, data and functions, and that's what it's got, and that's what it supports, and that's what it'll have.
Although if you've got a feature that, I mean, from what we saw earlier, if you have a feature that you think is functionally and you want to explore it more, see whether it's already been talked about, because it likely has. And if it hasn't, bring it up and have a conversation about it, since it's an open language.
Yep.
So, yeah.
Absolutely. But the future of, I will emphasize, the future of F# is always along those pragmatic axes, along being simpler and along the sweet spot. So we will be assessing features with regard to, is it hitting that sweet spot for productivity? The further plans optimization so that we don't need to imperative. Yes, so that's exactly that feature that I was telling you about. This it's actually list collector, but it's actually related to faster array list implementations. This is exactly the kind of feature which means that you can do the kind of programming I was telling you earlier, talked about earlier, and it runs really, really fast. So yes, we all about keeping you in the sweet spot of data and functions as much as possible, and making sure your code runs at very high performance and you don't need to imperatives. And very interested in more suggestions about how we can do that better. They're often really surprisingly clever things you can do. We've got an optimizing compiler. We've got a lot of choices about how we can optimize code. So yes, please, we want more of that. Just looking through some more questions. Lots of discussion back and forth between people, lots of it about performance.
There's some recent ones here about whether where in Microsoft FSharp's being used. A couple of people saying they've heard rumors about it being used in Azure and Bing.
There's some
we can talk about there?
There are some internalizer services using FSharp extensively. And I actually kind of don't keep tabs because nearly all my work is with the external kind of community. FSharp we don't make FSharp primarily for its use at Microsoft. We make it for its use in the broader world to support its use in enterprise programming context. If you want to learn a lot more about that, then come along and have a look at my FSharp Bonanza session at the recent conference.
That was there was in the same conference the Guido thing was.
Yeah, that's.
You see Jeff again?
Right. And here if I'm sharing screen, you see the FSharp Bonanza.
12? You covered like 12 or something? There's a ton.
We had some really inspiring enterprise uses of FSharp, all the way from Bangladesh, one of the biggest e-commerce companies in Bangladesh, all the way through to San Francisco and other great uses around the world. And a lot of it in like server-side logistics, which was kind of really interesting, and food supply chains and people doing work with refugee camps and food waste, and lots of really inspiring kind of things going on. We have some of the biggest media companies in Norway. We have people using it in the context of COVID information trackers. It's just getting used all over the place. So this is why we do FSharp. Of course, we love it when there's FSharp use at Microsoft, but we make it for the world to do their programming with. And this FSharp Bonanza is the thing I'd encourage you to go watch to learn all about that.
Yeah. Awesome.
Right. So I think lots of, if we didn't call out your name, thank you so much for coming along and contributing. Yeah.
It was super fun. We should do this more.
It has been great. You should come visit us more often. We kind of been leaning in line. We did a long time. We did a lot on .NET. We actually talked about SDK numbers. And now I think we're trying to do some a little bit more work on languages. People seem to like it a lot. So
it makes a great anchoring point for a lot of different discussions can go.
It does. It really does. It's actually where people touch. This theoretical stuff is all sits in the background, but you access it generally through one of the languages, and so it's a really great way to talk about these other things. And I don't know, we might have you come back and do like a whole thing on the safe stack. I think it's super interesting, some of the web stuff top to bottom and deeper into the DSL and then some of the design stuff to actually make a website. But let's see what people think after they watched you and Guido looking at that. That was such a fun time, and hats off to Guido. By the way, we didn't say it here. He says it in the video. It was Guido's idea, is what I understand. He saw somebody do it once before, and he thought that it would be a great way for he and Don to spend some time on camera together. And super excited that it made it part into this conference, and it's fully available now. So if you have, I don't know how fast it can go, but a little faster than an hour and a half, you can do it probably.
Yeah. Radio. Thank you so much for having me along today and being part of this team. I think I'll be enjoying being part of it more and more.
Great. Sounds fantastic.
Okay.
Awesome.
All right.
goodbye, everyone. And I think you in 4 weeks, I believe, is the next time
I
we
guess
have our
probably 4 weeks.
community stand-up. All right, bye-bye.
Bye.
All right. Bye.